Good evening, everyone. Let's start this meetup now. I would like you to take your seats, and preferably we can fill the seats in front. Emailed and said, hey guys, let's do this. And we just jumped on it. He emailed Lahiru, and then he emailed me, and then we just jumped on the opportunity. So today we have Lahiru to speak. He's the brains behind takas.lk. I'm actually impressed with the stuff that he does, because with so much of competition, I really admire the way he carries his brand image and business around. Next we have Manoj Ranavira. Most of you all know him because he has been a little bit noisy these few days. He is the founder of eDoc Reader, and also he's responsible for starting up Techcelerate. He will be telling you more about that. Jeevan is on the way. As you all know, he's the mastermind behind Orion City. And he also is the CEO of Anthony's Industries Group. He will be taking more of an approach of what an investor looks before funding a startup. So to start this event off, I would like to call Manoj Ranavira.
So when I just said on Facebook group that I'm coming over, I didn't expect to see so many of you, and thank you very much for you guys organizing it and everybody coming together today. Any chance I can get my slides on? No, I can talk without them, but just as expected, I went and joined a company to, work. And that was the way it was then. But these days things are different. Some of you probably are just out of the universities and working on your startup. That type of environment wasn't there when I was studying. So I think getting involved with startup is very high risk a thing to do. It's you don't know when you're going to get paid. You don't know whether you're going to be successful, and you tend to get emotionally involved. And when you get emotionally involved, you don't actually see when things are going wrong either. So I think it's in one respect a young man's game, but for me, I joined that game when I'm a little bit older. So as the slides are not coming, I'll just talk through. So if you look at my life, I had three things, right? The early stages where I studied, then working for somebody and getting paid, and getting a good pay, and then starting up. But all these are changing now. For example, universities in States and now UK is offering free education. Even Harvard is offering, MIT, quite a number of universities in UK. So education is becoming free, and there's a massive disruption happening over there. So I got into startups when I completed my MBA, like most people do when they get to sort of middle age. They start wondering what the hell what you're doing with it. So some of you end up probably doing MBA. MBAs are great, but it also gives sometimes too much confidence. It gives so much confidence you feel like you could do almost anything. And that's how I felt. So when I handed over my last assignment, I had a job waiting. So I went in to join a startup, and I was not just join, but I was going to invest quite a large sum of money. But things didn't work out as planned. The company went belly up 3 months after. So at a stage like that, if you are looking to join a startup, sometimes you have to wonder, there's no public information related to most startups. So you have to believe the people who pitch to you because they want you to join them. So that's believed that there were people in that team who were a lot more clever than me, who has done so many things that I could even dream of. And they've invested a significant amount of money, and they all lost a lot. But one of the things I did, luckily for me, is that I went and talked to everybody that they are suppliers. And that gave me the confidence that there's something wrong here. So I withheld my cash. But then the next 2 years, I took that idea forward. I burned a lot more than I would have lost from that startup. So one of the things happened during that 2-year period for me was that I figured out that I knew nothing about startups, just like some of you. I knew nothing about running a company. I believe I was good at what I was doing before, but I didn't know this world of startups. And really, the other problem I had was I didn't know anybody else who were crazy enough to start a company. This is around sort of middle 2000s. So the world hasn't really recovered from the dot-com bust. There wasn't much happening even in UK and even in US at that time. So I took that idea forward and I thought I could make success out of it. But, I couldn't. What ended up happening was that, I lost a lot of money. I lost 2 years of my life. I still got hair, so that's, I didn't quite lose that. But at that time, there was a blog being created called Tech. It started by a lawyer called Michael Arrington in States, and it soon spread to UK, and one of my friends started becoming the editor. So he was looking for stories, and him saying, these are the problems I got, I don't know anybody. And that's how I started setting up what's called Texelred. It wasn't called Texelred then. It was the Web 2.0, so everything has to have a 2.0. So we call it Northern Startup 2.0, but obviously, that only lasted a few years because 2.0 became quite boring. So I started getting a few people just like this into a room, and we got even attendees coming from at that time. This was in Manchester in UK. So if you don't know Manchester is about 200 miles from London. It's in the north, so the people in the south think we still live in caves. Southerners don't come to the north in the UK. They all expect us to come down. So we had this event, and luckily I managed to convince KPMG, I assume you all know KPMG, to sponsor us for the first 2 years. So it was just one event, and nobody else was running any events whatsoever. And soon, people like it, so we continue to have quarterly events, and we got it to about monthly events, and I end up running about 100 events. So we built a community of about 2,100 people. There was no consultancy offer, nothing. It's simply getting people into one space. We had, obviously, 3 types of individuals, or 4 types. We have tech entrepreneurs, like some of you, people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world and start something. And then we had the investors. That was the big problem we had living in the north, was that all the investors were in the south, and they didn't really want to come. And many other people have tried to bring these investors, but somehow I managed to actually bring them to north. And that was a... Right, can we go back to the first one then? No, the one before. Right, so we've done that. So I've blurred a lot about the third one. So if you can go to the next one, next slide, please. Right, so all I'm going to talk about is 5 lessons, and hopefully you'll learn something, or if not, you're very welcome to criticize me at the end. So all startups starts with the idea, right? There's 2 ways that ideas come about. One is that you have a problem, and you look for a solution, and you can't find a solution, or you might find a solution that you don't like. You end up then doing something about it. So there's a famous company called 37 Signals. Some of you probably have read their books, and if you know about Ruby on Rails, those guys created that. So that's how 37 Signals started, and they created multiple products because they simply didn't like what was out there. So that's the one way to start a startup. The other one is that you start, get up in the morning and thinking, oh, I want to do a startup. What shall I do, right? Especially people who have sold companies are in that situation. I know one guy in Manchester, and he's just been on the long holiday because he's cash his company, and he's just going through one idea at a time. He doesn't know what to do. So there's two ways, but the ones that where you come across a problem because you feel it and you create the product for yourself, really, and then you feel that that product is profound, or the solution is profound, then there will be other people who want to use it. So those companies tend to be more successful. If you take Facebook, well, if you believe the film, it was about Mark Zuckerberg getting revenge out of his girlfriend, if that's true. So, again, that's the problem he was having and trying to solve. And, the stories are the same. If you take Twitter, YouTube, everything, most successful companies are related to solving a problem that individual had. Very quickly moving forward, opportunity could be a product, which is, you build something, you sell, or it could even be a feature. A good example of a feature is an app called Buffer. And all it does is let you schedule your tweets. So instead of tweeting all the time, you just put a time gap. And now it's quite a successful company. So you don't need to have a great, some gigantic idea that's going to revolutionize the world. It could be something so simple, but if you really work hard at it, you could create a business out of that. But the problem is, are you creating a lifestyle business, which is, giving you a good, or do you want a billion-dollar company? Unfortunately, $1 billion isn't cool anymore, but can we go to the next slide, please? Right, the second lesson is really about your founders. When you start a company, sometimes it's your mate, your friend that's going to be your co-founder. You got to really think about this, because you might not worry about that, but some cases, most companies end up having a lot of difficulties. So on the right is moneysupermarket.com in UK. They launched around a $1 billion valuation. Sorry, they IPO'd at a $1 billion valuation. But the guy on the right, they had a 50-50 partnership. The guy on the right didn't want to actually work for the company after a while, right? So Simon Nixon on the left was left with running the company. He created the company in one respect or another, but the other guy held 50%. So when they tried to list on the stock exchange, he had to go and buy the other guy out, right? So that was really a tough situation. If you look at the two guys at the left, they are the co-founders of a company called Huddle, which is probably one of the best startups in UK. Now, they're still friends, they're working close. They raise about, you can't see the bottom part of the slide, but they raise about, I think about 35 million in funding. And I just had a quick look at yesterday, they still got about 12% shares, each of them. So they still have control. So, you got to really think about the founding team. The problem I had with founding teams is that when I started eDocker, I started with 3 other people. So within 12 months, we got selected as one of the 20 hottest startups of UK, and I toured San Francisco, etc. But my other 3 guys didn't want to do anything after that. So I spent years trying to get them out. Luckily, I didn't have to lose my shirt. I bought them out for £1. So all I lost was time. But again, you had to be really careful about who you bring onto your into your shareholding. Can we go to the next one, please? Right. You could build a lifestyle business, but if you want to really build a high-growth company that's moving very fast with the international market in place, it's really hard to build a company these days without venture capital. In the old days, you could build a company, you grow the company through the revenues you generate. But these days, revenues really come quite late for most companies. So you need to have capital, somehow external capital, keep pumping, keep employing people, keep producing, developing that product. So it's really hard. So you really need to have external capital. The logo on the left is pretty much, so that's becoming the almost a de facto model. But that doesn't mean you can't do the whole way. So the guy, the Pardot, for example, they built a company within 5 years. And the founder, David Cummings, he invested about 1.2 million himself, brought people on board, and he sold after 5 years for $95 million to exact target. So you could still do that. But that guy actually knew what he was doing, right? And he was prepared to put money in himself. And luckily for him, it worked. But in most cases, you need external funding if you want to build that big company. Next one. Right. With many companies, one of the biggest problems is how do you get to your customer? You could do cold calling, you could make it online, just like our service. But really, if you really want to get traction, you have to get to a large number of your customers very quickly. So if you look at cars, most of the cars are actually sold through dealers, right? You have a dealership. Even there's a Lamborghini one here. I was impressed. So how do you build something similar to that for your startup? It's really, really hard. The company that I find most interesting is a company called Salesforce, which you probably know. But Salesforce success is not just their subscription-based business model, but it's about who sits outside them. Salesforce is really a great case study because they they launched the product within 12 months of founding the company. Within 10 years, they generated 1 billion revenues. So behind that is about their distribution network. The guys who actually does the configurations, the consultancies, the professional services. So you got to think about your model and see, how are we going to get that distribution network in place if you really want to grow your business very fast. So I'm involved with another business called Livestack. I don't own it, unfortunately. I'm working for somebody else. It's a startup that a company called Courseway is spinning out, and I'm helping them with a strategy, and I'll bring the sort of the startup knowledge to them. The beauty with them is that they have 2,000 existing customer base we can tap into. So for your startup, where are you going to find that type of channel? Because if you can find that, that's profound. That's going to make your company fly very fast. Next one, please. Right, okay. If you look at US companies, especially most companies seem to be just creating to sell within 2-3 years or 5 years. And that chart, you've probably seen it, that it shows basically how many users, these are all consumer apps though, how many users they had in year 4. Everybody's talking about WhatsApp, but really, by the time WhatsApp came to the marketplace, everybody knew what these type of tools means. So they didn't have that. They didn't have to educate the marketplace. So, but it's a good product. It flies. So these guys are pretty much it's growing very very fast, which is taking a huge amount of investment. I think Twitter has raised over $1 billion. I think. But really, I mean, if you are building a big business, what are you really trying to do? Is it a big problem you're trying to solve? Do you know the guy on the left? Anybody recognize him? No? Right. It's a product called Evernote. It just, you could just use it as a journal. You could upload images, whatever else. And what they are trying to do is they're trying to build a company that's going to last 100 years, right? And you can't even think about creating a company that lasts 5 years, let alone 10 years. But that's what he's trying to do. So he's giving a 100-year guarantee to you that your data will be safe. Right? So he's trying to build a big business. And it's a freemium model. I assume everybody knows freemium. Freemium is you have free plan and you have a paid plan. They tend to have the best conversion rate in terms of large volumes. They got about 7% conversion rate. That's really high. We don't have that with eDocker, unfortunately. So that's somebody who's looking at the marketplace and saying, oh, I want to build a company that's going to last longer. That's how companies were built before the .com, Web 2.0 came about. So there are still some crazy people out there who think they can do it. So I think I'm done. Next. Yeah, I'm done. And if there's time, I'll take one or two questions.
Sri Lanka, from here. UK, you have access to many things, basically. Venture capitalist network, everything is there. So how do you do it from sitting in Colombo? What are the challenges you see?
So if I look at it, you have San Francisco. So what people think is that if you set up business in San Francisco, it's going to take off. But what you don't hear is all the failures, all the other problems. People, it's just like Hollywood, right? Everybody wants to be an actor or actress, but you can't. So then if you come to UK and look at London, everybody again thinks, it's easy. It's not, because it's a little bit harder than San Francisco. Then if you come to Manchester, where I live, it's get harder. When you come to Sri Lanka, it gets even harder. So among here, there may be people who are successful in business. They might have some disposable income. They might be interested in investing a small amount of money into a startup. They just completely taking a gamble. They could lose that in a casino or a stock exchange. It's the same deal. They might also have some expertise that might be useful to the startups. Now, startup by definition think they don't need consultants, right? Because they believe that they know everything, but they don't, right? So there's lots of different ways you could help, but I think the backbone for this is everybody coming together and sharing knowledge. One of the things I managed to do is I managed to get people who wouldn't share knowledge to come and speak about their successes. I also got them to come and talk about what didn't work. So by doing that, rather than you keeping that knowledge to yourself, if you share that, because in most cases, the people you share with, they're not your competitors. Your competitors are global these days, right? So I think you could do it. You just need maybe 2-3 people who want to drive this forward. But I'm sure people will come forward and share what they know, and that would be the start. How to get investors? I think probably for the seed funding stage, I think you could find investors in Sri Lanka. But if you want Series A and upwards, then the only other possibility might be, looking at Colombo Stock Exchange, who's over there. If you want to get investment from outside, you got to have, you got to be based out there. Just a good example, I mentioned a company called Buffer. So that's a young guy from Sheffield in UK. He actually, I know them very well because I was one of the first to see it. I thought it was just a crazy idea. It would never work. But he moved to San Francisco and he, network. He got into accelerator. He built a network. He got an investment, and so you had to sometimes go where the money is. So you had to decide. I think you could get seed funding here. It's just that people need to be more aware. So these type of events, if you can find a way to get the traditional investors into the, get mixed up, even mixed with you guys, then I think that would be a start. Anybody else? No? Right? Next.
And if you ever build that Lamborghini, let me test drive that. So how many entrepreneurs in the crowd today? Raise your hands, please. None? Okay, we have a few. So basically about 20% of the crowd are entrepreneurs. Are you looking for funding? Yeah, we have 1, 2. Okay, so next up, 3, we have 3. Lovely. So the next topic will be really useful for you because Lahiru will be talking about how to raise. He'll be talking about lessons he learned by raising seed funding and the first round of funding. So let's have Lahiru here.
Thanks, Manoj. Thanks, Inosh. I am, as a matter of fact, not the brains behind Takas. I like to think I'm the more good looks behind Takas. But it's a huge team, actually. There were 2 other founding members at Takas. One who heads operations and one who kind of guides us at a much broader level. I generally do the day-to-day runnings of Takas, and show my face at every possible occasion I can. I want to actually thank Manoj for creating this event so we can all get together because it's fundamentally important that the people in Sri Lanka, especially the tech community, stick together because it's a small community still. And the strength of our community will be coming together in order to come up with better products and services, which eventually thanks to that, Manoj. And Inosh also played a great role with his team bringing this event to you. Essentially, I wanted to talk about some of my experiences. Just essentially, a little bit about Takas. We started with some seed funding from Blue Ocean Ventures, as well as some angel investors. What Manoj showed on the graph at seed level funding. And then we promised our investors that we will come up with an online store called takas.lk, which will sell electronics. We will try to hit some benchmarks. Once we completed that, we had to do what you would call a Series A funding in order to expand the market, expand our business based on essentially the benchmarks we hit. So these are some of these lessons which we learned. And this said, there's a small caveat. I mean, nothing I guess can be mimicked because everybody should essentially make their own journey to success. So just because Takas kind of experienced this, it's not a recipe for success. I mean, if you mean raising funds, because I think different people can do different things. It's just realizing what your strengths are and then kind of honing on it. I don't know majority of the people here who are here, which is good. So the first lesson, I suppose, for me and for everybody else is try to get as many of you as possible by the time this event is over. Because especially in tech, ideas are money, ideas will create wealth, as opposed to traditional businesses which has a far more fundamental idea of wealth. And I think we'll talk about it more during the panel discussion. The first thing about raising funds is doing due diligence. I found this cartoon to be quite funny. I can't even read it now. But he's obviously going to a venture capitalist, but it's a vulture. And it says, so the first lesson, I suppose, is, you have to do due diligence on two things when you are raising funds. One, your business model itself. Because as entrepreneurs, we can always get carried on. I'm 32 years old. I've been getting business ideas since I was around 15. My friends used to actually laugh at me, some of them who are here, and they'll be like, oh, that's Lahiru's business idea 354. So that's part, you feel like you get this amazing idea which you can kind of run with, and which will make you a billionaire and get a yacht, which will probably be docked because you don't know how to use it. But if you do your due diligence, then all of a sudden you know what your market is when you're pitching to somebody and so on and so forth. I kind of learned that more about the people when I went to them to ask money, because usually the other problem is when you're raising money and you have no money, there are two types of people on this planet: the people who have money and the people who have none. So you just go to people with a rupee sign on them and say, if you can't connect with these people, if you don't know what their interests are, it'll be very hard for entrepreneurs to raise money. So doing both due diligence on the business model which you're running, that will add value to the story you're telling, as well as knowing who you're speaking to really helps in this road forward. Okay, so develop a great team. I found this cartoon, which is fantastic. The picture, sorry. So I think everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. There are only a few people who have an overall, essentially, a skill set to execute something. So knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are when you're developing a team and bringing people together who can compensate for maybe the lack of it or even magnify the skill set you have is, I think, paramount in developing a good startup team. I think Manoj also kind of alluded to this when he was pitching about the team he built up and some team members not playing by the rules or not carrying the full weight. So essentially, I think one of the reasons takas to this days have been quite successful is there is a good balancing out. I'm weak operationally, I can tell you this much. I lose my own like mobile phone 10 times a day. My wife and best friend who I live with will attest to this because I like run around the house. And trying to, so operationally I'm weak, but I'm running a company which is supposed to be very operationally sound. That's because I have a team member who is very good at that job. And as far as this game is concerned or this business is concerned, you need experience, like you will need mentorship. So you need that either through somebody who you make contact with or somebody you know. So I have that in my chairman who has given me very good mentorship. You don't necessarily have to agree with everything they have to say, or you tend to get bullied into certain things which you might not necessarily like. But I think end of the day, you will have a better business if you kind of do that. So once you get this great idea and you've done your due diligence, and then you build your team up, before you go to the so-called real world and start pitching, pitch to your family and friends. I picked this picture up because if anybody knows Family Guy, that guy is a big retard. The family is no better, really. So I always felt, within reason, like no matter what other people think of you as a person, like, even if it's Lahiru's idea 354, there are friends and family who will listen to your ideas. And they might not maybe have the greatest feedback, but you always have to kind of listen to what they have to say and think through those problems, because the chances are times you really have not thought through the business model or how to execute something. So pitch to friends, which I've spelled wrong, and family will be a great start point. Get their feedback and model your pitch accordingly. And this, the thing which you learn with age, and when you do what we do or Manoj does or any other entrepreneur, you have to learn how to tell a good story. And this is, I think, connected to some of the points which I've been telling. It helps to know who you're pitching to in order to figure out what kind of story to tell. The story which you tell, I allude to this actually later on as well, but you need to be convinced of the business model which you are selling to somebody. So it has to be honest, and the story has to make sense to the people who you speak to. And this comes with venture as well in Sri Lanka, seed especially. In Sri Lanka a few years ago, seed funding may not have been even heard of, but now it's happening a lot more. There's far more doors being opened. But let's say 5 years back, I mean, there was none of it. And Sri Lankan investors might have to go out of these shows to kind of make that case. And more times than not, they had to make a case to a Sri Lankan, because you have to find some commonality between. So that's why the telling of the story is, I think, a very important case. So you need to really brush up on the story, have a concise, short story which makes sense. So for e-commerce, for a long time, I think mentorship from Rajan Anandan, who invested with us, he said, your first slide essentially should be the problem you solve. It is that story which, the problem, and then you tell a story about how you essentially solve this problem. The next thing, when you are either raising at seed funding or at first round and so on and so forth, one of the things, great challenges for an entrepreneur or somebody who runs it is the time factor. Because you kind of end up doing that. For 6 months, you might even forget kind of what business you're doing, because all the time from morning till night, you're pitching towards people, you're refining your projects and so on and so forth. And you have to be ready for this. I mean, I wasn't really warned about it, and the toll it may take personally on you, but you really have to prepare yourself, I think, as an entrepreneur for it. And it's also a great time to essentially learn about oneself and others. So I think when you're asking for money, I mean, the kind of the ecosystem we live in, still money is a very valuable thing. So if you keep asking money from people, you will learn a lot about your standing with the world you live in. So you have to be kind of prepared for that, I think, as a person. Because you will learn a lot about your strengths, weaknesses, who you can depend on, who you can't, and so on and so forth. It doesn't get talked about a lot, but it's a reality of what we do. I have some, so those are essentially, I think, the major lessons which I've learned. There's one more slide before that. I have some helpful tips as well. So those were the, and there's a cat there for a good reason. So only go ahead with something if you believe in it 100%. Don't try to sell something which you don't believe in yourself. Be honest, because people can read you. I think I got some money because I was just being honest, and people thought, okay, I don't think, he believes in it so much that maybe we'll give him some money. Because if you believe in what you do, and I keep talking to people, because in our business especially, investments don't just come in the sense of rupees. I mean, there's people here who have helped me out insurmountably, even by either a gesture or just saying, Rukman is here, and he certainly did that. And Jeevan, I mean, like, you make sometimes lifelong friends because of this. Because if you keep talking to people, they will help out, even in your business, even in your life. So just because somebody says, sorry, I'm not going to invest in your company, just don't close the door on it, because I think that's a bad idea. And my cat, who kind of inspires me, no matter how many times she gets fed in the morning, if she sees you, she runs to the fridge and back to you again, time and time again. So I feel like you have to be like that cat, because someday you have a weak day, or you're feeling very good about yourself, and she gets fed 3 times in the morning. So you want to be that cat on that good day, but you won't get it unless the cat doesn't keep asking for it. So thank you very much for being so attentive. I hope I didn't overrun my time. Thanks so much. And I'll take some questions during panel discussion time, because we're running short on time as well. Thank you.
So Lahiru pointed out that you need to find an investor which has a rupee sign on him. Well, Lahiru, I also, about 2 years back, we just heard that a bunch of people are throwing some money, so I called my partner as well, and we went, since they're giving money. And we pitched the idea, and one person in the panel asked, how much of equity are you willing to give up? And I was like, what's that? So that would be Jeevan. I don't know whether you remember that. So if Jeevan, he's over here. So Jeevan, we would like to call you on stage, and he will be essentially talking about what an investor looks at when funding a startup.
Thank you. So first I'd like to say thanks Manoj and Lahiru for really organizing this event and making me part of it. I don't have an official slide deck. I'm kind of playing off the cuff here. But I think in terms of what Orion City does, Orion City really, believe it or not, at one point was a startup by itself. We had about 5 desks, in a very dingy corner in an old factory building. And today we have about 500,000 square feet, growing to, go to about 3 million. So really we see this as giving back to, startup and startup ecosystem, and we're really into kind of startups. And I'm also really, really happy to announce that, we do have something called Orion Nest right now. Which we started when we first, about 3 years ago, and now we're trying to take it to the next level, where we are doing about 4,000 square feet of very kind of high-end incubation center with coffee bean, tea leaf underneath it, a library, an IT library. So we feel these kind of things will kind of help the ecosystem in Sri Lanka. And just going back to the ecosystem concept, I'll go back to that as well. I really want to break this down into 3 things. One is kind of share my experience running startups and creating startups, and maybe what I learned from each experience. Also, I think give you a brief history of what's happened over the past 3 years. I think it's useful to kind of know about what's happened with this ecosystem and how it's come about. And lastly, I think really what you said is, what do we look for? Look for an entrepreneur. So starting on the first thing, I think Sri Lanka. So I started kind of my career in university, where I started very much like we had a how do you say, like a pitch final to start your own business. And what I created was something called Phone to Car, and not the most coolest of names, but basically what it was a ride-share system, and this was about 8 years ago, based on IVR, where it connects the ride originator to the ride giver. And it actually worked. You know, you would call and say, I'm going from Colombo 4 to Magic City, and it would basically connect you to somebody who's going within a 1 mile's radius for the starting and ending location. So that concept actually worked. You know, we were in university, we were very young. I had 4 kind of partners with me. And we were making about $3,000 in net profit, you know, in year 1, which is not bad. Lessons I learned from that is be very careful with your founding partners, because I think everyone was in university. They had, you know, different ideas of what they want to do after they graduate from university. You know, some returned home, some went on to jobs. We couldn't really sustain the company. So eventually we, you know, and I obviously wanted to return to Sri Lanka as well. So we ended up winding that company down. But since then, that entrepreneurial bug was kind of built in me, and I wanted to create many more startups, very similar to Lahuru. Idea 500, you know, you'll have like 1 million ideas, and you got to choose which ones to select. The next idea I selected was, this was again about 7 years ago, was takas.lk, which was pretty much an eBay copy for the Sri Lankan market. Okay, I'm the first to admit it, that it was a phenomenal failure. Even though we had things like cash on delivery, you know, we marketed a lot of stuff, etc. It was a phenomenal failure. And the lesson that I want to tell you guys right now from that, I learned was don't be afraid of failure, you know? And I think that's important for, you know, people that are starting up, is don't be afraid of failure, just learn to fail fast, right? Learn to fail fast and go on to the next thing. And I think from that, you know, I don't see it as a bad thing, because we actually then created a software services company out of it, right? Which we were able to grow to about 100 people, et cetera, et cetera. And from that, you know, a BPM services company, right? Then I think the opportunity of Orion City came about, where we could do a lot of interesting, I mean, when you're starting up your own company, I saw there wasn't a lack of IT infrastructure in Sri Lanka, which I saw as an opportunity to kind of then build for other people. Guys like you, guys like startups who want to kind of grow and expand quickly, and, you know, don't want the hassle of, you know, creating your own office space. So that's really how the Orion City concept started. And I think since then we've had, I would say, a reasonable amount of success. Of course, I always want to grow it much faster, much quicker, like you guys as well. And I think, you know, we'll continue to grow that and take it from there. Since that time, this was about 3 years ago, now I'm going to the history of kind of the ecosystem, is that there wasn't much of a startup culture ecosystem in Sri Lanka. 3 years ago, it's very frustrating being an entrepreneur. I have to tell you, there wasn't many mind-like people, you know, like-minded people in Sri Lanka, like Lahuru and stuff, that you could bounce ideas off and stuff like that. But, and today you guys are very, very lucky. So 3 years ago, I think 4 years ago, Slascom was having, I'm a director of Slascom. Slascom's the industry body for IT BPO. Definitely get involved in it. There's Ruindu somewhere here who's doing, heading 1,000 startups. So 3 years ago, Slascom, the entrepreneurship forum, was trying to do various things in a startup and startup ecosystem. We were doing very haphazard events, and I would say nothing was really creating that ecosystem. And I think there was an individual named of Prajeet, who kind of had this idea of venture capital in Sri Lanka. And basically me, Prajeet, Sanath, Mafaz, and and Apurva got together and created something called the Lankan Angel Network. Okay, so what this does is basically fund startups, right, with risk capital, okay, seed funding. And we don't take majority in your company, we take minority in your company, and we very much believe that the entrepreneurs should hold majority in your company and they should run the company as they see fit. Having created that, I think in the last 3 years, we've seen events like Venture Engine, Build SL, Spiralation with ICTA. We've seen a whole bunch of innovation and entrepreneurship events happen, and it's really great to see that startup culture and that startup ecosystem kind of grow in Sri Lanka. I don't have to tell you that if you're an entrepreneur, this is probably one of the best times in Sri Lanka to start a company and do something and take on a bit of risk and put yourself out there. Okay, so just to give you a better background of what's happened in the last 4 to 5 years in Sri Lanka. Since, and really now I want to go into kind of what investors look at in terms of startups, and when they want to invest in a startup, what do they look for in a company? I think the main thing that kind of an investor looks in when they're looking to invest into a company is really the entrepreneur themselves, okay? They want to know they can trust this person, right? Me personally, I don't look at companies where they're building to flip it to somebody else, right? When I look at Orion City, I did not build Orion City to then turn around and sell to somebody else. I'm going to stay with this company for the next, until I die, basically. Maybe that's because, I come from a family that basically remains in the business till they die, but I think, I think there's something to be said about that. You're not looking, you're looking to build long-term share value, right? You're not looking for quick fixes or quick, cuts and etc. So I think that kind of integrity, those kind of values are needed in an entrepreneur. And that kind of commitment too, because you're not looking at next 3 to 5 years, I'm going to flip this, I'm going to be a millionaire, blah, blah, blah. That never works, okay? Case in point, there are a couple of companies in Sri Lanka that has happened, and you see kind of those brands dying out over time. So I think really what we look for is the entrepreneur itself, kind of the trust, the ability to communicate, integrity of the entrepreneur, ability to kind of communicate properly on what their intentions are. Second, I really think is we do like to see some scalability in your model, right? We always question is, okay, what happens if you can then take this and do it in India or do it in Australia, etc. Does this model only work for a very small defined market? It's fine being a niche, but I think scalability of your business is a must. And I think those are things that we look at typically when we look at an entity. We say, is the business model scalable? Is it interesting enough to take to another country? Because I think Sri Lanka going forward is a very small market. When you guys are building companies and going to be dedicating the next 10 years of your life, you guys should be looking at how do I take this outside of Sri Lanka. And I think that's something Lankan Angel Network is trying to do. Is we've now built this ecosystem with the Indian Angel Network. We're building it with with people in Australia, people in UK, all this other stuff, and we're hoping that when you come on board, we'll be able to say, okay, this idea will fit into Singapore really nicely. So maybe we'll introduce you to a Singapore angel investor who will then take on some risk capital and grow it there. I know Rookman itself is trying to grow in India, for example. So I think scalability is very important. I also think, for me, your financial model is very important as well, right? So you need to have some kind of, finance acumen. You don't have to have it yourself, but maybe, you have someone in your team with some, financial acumen and know that, they're not, the cost of acquisition for a particular client is not more than, what you're spending every month in a business. So, those are metrics that we look at when we look at your financial model and before we decide to invest in you. So a sound kind of financial model is also necessary. Really, I think, these are the real main things that we look at when we look at a business. I think, Lankan Angel Network has invested in about 12 companies to a tune of about $1.6 million thus far. We're looking, to this year's venture engine, and other companies are coming on board as we speak to invest in more. So anyway, I think we have about 55 investors on the Lankan Angel Network. All of them top CEOs of various companies offering time for mentorship, for these startups. So I think, going forward, I think this is the best time to be a startup in Sri Lanka. Go out there and do something. Thank you.
So in interest of time, we are a little bit off schedule since we started late. So now we are going to have a panel discussion. So let me invite Jeevan, Manoj, and Lahiru. We had a great sandwich so far. Manoj shared on startup lessons learned. And then in middle, Lahiru shared on how to raise funds. And Jeevan coming and saying, telling about what an investor looks before funding a startup. Now, I am just as what do you say, in your own level, like I'm here to learn from these guys. And I'm also having my own startup, and we are looking for funds. So you're free to ask any questions and learn from these guys today, because you're not going to get another meetup like this anytime soon. So the first panel discussion will be on the tech ecosystem in Sri Lanka. And then we'll be having the second panel discussion on the policy changes needed for this ecosystem to thrive. So we have speakers here. I would like to strip down the ecosystem into categories and then address it one by one. So I would like to start by category on the ecosystem, and then y'all can ask questions whenever you feel like asking. So about the ecosystem, I have stripped it down to culture, the society, the education, and the facilitators. We have this big three. That's any parent want their child to be a doctor, engineer, or a lawyer. But it's not the big four. It's not the doctor, engineer, lawyer, or the entrepreneur. Now, I would like to raise this question at Lahiru. Was it an influence you had from your parents that you became an entrepreneur? Or, what made you make this decision to become an entrepreneur?
Thanks, Irush. Well, not to trivialize it, but I can tell you, most parents do want that, but if your child is not sharp enough, that's never open. So I wouldn't have become either. So anyways, but actually I've read entrepreneurs essentially are more like jack of all trades. The moment you're a master of something, you tend to specialize in it and make anyway a hell of a lot of money doing that. So the fact that I wasn't really good at anything particularly very well helped. The other reason is, I suppose I have very expensive taste. I would like to come up with something and say, it's for the betterment of mankind. It's not. I just don't have the money to buy the things I really want in life. And essentially that really gave me two stark choices. Either I was given a pathway where maybe by the time I'm 55, and I got very lucky, I would have bought myself like a BMW 3 Series here, maybe a Nissan, I don't know, with the taxes. Or I was supposed to take a chance, a calculated chance, and develop something which led to wealth creation for myself. But that said, the wealth creation happens unless you're a drug kingpin by giving services which add value to people's lives. So developing takas, so essentially the short story was the fact that a mediocre student comes from a entrepreneurial background as far as the family is concerned. So I had a good enough idea of what it took to kind of execute certain things. And also the personal drive. Personal drive from person to person may vary. My personal drive was trying to make some money.
Thank you, Lahiru. So now, if let's say down the line, if when I become a parent, if my child comes and says that he wants to become an entrepreneur, I'll be the first one to clap my hands and say, hey, you should go do it. But then comes the societal part, because what do we feel now? As an entrepreneur myself, what do we feel? Because let's say you go for a family party, a get together, and your cousins have things to say like, I'm the assistant manager of Brandix, and somebody says I'm working at Unilever. And then when they ask you a question, where do you work? You say you're having your own startup, you're an entrepreneur. And then they blink at you like, you have done some grave mistake. Sometimes, even your own parents might have a little bit of hesitance to say, what your child is doing. Because, when other parents and friends come and boast about, about all of this, it's a bit of a hesitant situation for other parents as well. That's where the societal part kicks in. Now, again, I would like to ask this from Lahiru and then a little bit from Manoj as well. What needs to change in the society? I mean, why is entrepreneurship is not considered sort of a repeated thing yet in Sri Lanka? And what are the lessons that we can learn from a place like Manchester? So first, Lahiru.
Thanks again. I'm not saying this to suck up to Jeevan, but I will tell you this much, because the people, the way my parents did business, maybe your parents and your grandparents, and how you do business have fundamentally helped us change societal views about what entrepreneurship is and how business people should play a role in society. So, whether we like it or not, our parents have, in my mind, given up, make decisions for the best of us. And also they are a creation of their context, right? So there hasn't been this kind of business leaders, I feel, in Sri Lanka, for better or for worse, who has, done maybe what you guys do with the Angel Network, give it a certain degree of limelight and so on and so forth. And that, currently I think it is changing. You're spot on though. I think we need more people to take chances at a young age, because otherwise we don't create wealth as fast as we should as a nation. But essentially I think what Jeevan, I think definitely Prajit, what they have done is also brought up, I see Hiran here. So, because, they legitimize the hard work which kind of goes into it. And then say, this is a viable alternative to what has been historically been known as things which create wealth over time and stability. I think this is the difference from my personal view. So,
I just have a thought of what you're asking. I think what you're asking for is nature versus nurture. Is that what you're asking for? Are you kind of born with the ability of be an entrepreneur, or is it kind of your your society and culture that kind of molds and changes you? I honestly I don't know, but I think just looking at my grandfather's experience, for instance, I mean, you could argue that he didn't come from an entrepreneurial background. He didn't have much of education either, but he was put in very hard circumstances where the only thing that he could do was, was to make a business and survive and do really well at it. So I think that is, one area of kind of, your, the background you come from. But also, I think there are people who have a lot of wealth who are, trying to give back and do something as well. So I'm not sure, there's a secret formula per se for, whether it's, nature versus nurture. I think it's really very much that individual to kind of, find his own way and kind of pave his own way to become an entrepreneur.
What lessons can be drawn from Manchester? Good one. I think really, I mean, when I was growing up, all I want to be is an engineer. It wasn't something that my parents pushed for me to be, but it's just what I've seen and what I want to be. I think at that time the word entrepreneurship wasn't popular. The word businessman was there. I think the businessman type thing was not seen as something that you aspire to be. No harm intended. But I mean, looking back at what's happening in UK is that, the countries will look, if you look at a lot of different countries, they are looking for growth. Where are the growth markets? And definitely tech has been seen as an area for growth. And every country, as far as I know, if interested in tech, they always look at Silicon Valley and say, how can we create that? So in UK, we got what's called Tech City, and David Cameron, our Prime Minister, really put some energy into that. Done a deal with Google, so Google got a campus over there. And that itself given a lot of PR or a lot of noise, even though there's questions been asked about the substance. So now suddenly the entrepreneurship is in the media. It's a cool thing to be. So, if I look at my kids, I got two daughters. One is 14 and the other is 10. And my 14-year-old is not interested in anything like that at the moment. She's more interested in fashion. But she understands that she is serious about study. My youngest daughter has got a cookie-wookie.com. It's not launched because she doesn't focus on one thing. But the whole idea is she's actually very good at making cookies. She can make all by herself for the last 2 years or so. So the whole idea was to set up an e-commerce site. I need to take some hints from you and sell cookies online. So, one point I was trying to really push her to do it, but then I had to back off because she's very young and she should be free to decide what she wants to do. She doesn't have to be serious at when she's 8 and 9. So I think because people are hearing more and more about entrepreneurship, I think it will become an option. But entrepreneurship is not a job. It's something you do, and it's not for everybody. I think a lot of us look at Facebook, WhatsApp, these companies being acquired for large sums of money, and some of us feel like let's take a stab at that. But it's not really for everybody because these companies need employees, and you have to be engineers and doctors and whatever else. But I think definitely there's more awareness. And I think, probably in a few years' time, that could be considered as an option.
Thank you. That was a well-blended answer from all three gentlemen. Well, any questions that we can take? Well, moving on to the education side of it now, I would also like to draw an example from a person who registered, but I don't think he's here. Danika, one of the recent successful tech startups who created Bhasha. But then he also had a dilemma. Before starting up, he had two options in his hand, whether to start up Bhasha or go for a normal job. But then he met another entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, Harsha Purasinghe, and then he convinced Danika to go ahead with Bhasha. And that's how Danika started Bhasha. Now he's successful. But the thing is, why was he hesitant? Does our education, doesn't it provide enough confidence that we can go out and do something? And also, why do we see that, most of the foreign educated kids are the ones who are starting up? They are the ones who are becoming entrepreneurs. And even drawing the example from you and Lahiru, uh, do we see a trend there? And is there anything to be changed? So I will ask this from Jeevan.
Okay. I think the main concern of, say, Sri Lankan education system is really, I think there's a lot of spoon feeding going on, in the sense that, okay, and I think generally the way somebody is taught is, okay, this is the question, this is the answer. But I think in entrepreneurship there could be many answers, and I really think, right now there's a lot of spoon feeding going on in the education system, and I think no one's got it perfect. I think the US, for example, is starting things like, okay, let's do kind of the boring. Okay, these are the do the lessons at home on, for example, Khan Academy, and then basically come to class and do a practical set of it, of things, right? Work with peers, communicate with your peers, do something practical in your time at class with the teacher support. So the way of education is going is also changing, and I think Sri Lanka really needs to do a lot about that mindset, that spoon feeding that goes on in the early days, the mindset change, etc. So if it's done early, I think people taking ability to take risks. Changing cultural perception of risk, because if you're in Sri Lanka, if you take a risk and you fail, you're suddenly shunned by society. Or this person has failed, and they didn't do anything with their lives. They can't get married, and blah blah blah. So, Larry, I'm glad you got married before that. So I think that mindset change has to really happen, and it needs to happen early in the education system. I think SLASCOM is driving various initiatives through, to bring IT, kind of change the IT mindset. Because if you look at Sri Lanka on a global scale, we're competing with, Cambodia, Vietnam, etc., and all these kind of emerging countries in the future. And the only way we see ourselves differentiated is if we have this kind of, this entrepreneurs, this bit of Silicon Valley, or going on in Sri Lanka, to differentiate ourselves from India, where it's kind of you hire 1,000 programmers. Here we want to try and differentiate ourselves with products and kind of unique thinking and ability to kind of innovate for the customer, etc. So I think that mindset change has to happen. Sri Lanka being kind of a small country, we can kind of do that quickly, and we need to do that quickly. So that's my answer.
So I think you pointed out a very valid thing, the fear of failure. I think that's one of the reasons that we Sri Lankans are hesitant to go into entrepreneurship, because failure means it's almost considered the end of your life here, because you cannot show your face to anyone. But then what can we find from Manchester? What are the trends then? What is not exactly the trends, the perception of failure and stuff like that?
Failure is not definitely looked upon as something good in UK. It's what the culture is. If you look at American startups, if you fail once, twice, fine. If you can learn and then improve in third time, that's seen as a great thing it's a great experience to have. But it's not seen the same light in the UK. So we don't talk too much about failures. But if you look at the key difference between the north, where Manchester is, and the south, is that in south people talk a lot about their startups. There's a lot of publicity. You keep the head down, you get on with it. We don't have a lot of startups, but the example I showed you in one of around the team, moneysupermarket.com was founded in the north of UK, northwest. So that's the second company in the world to have an IPO with over $1 billion valuation. First was Google, but a lot of people don't know about that because we hear so much about US companies. Luckily for Manchester, there's 2 other companies going for $1 billion valuations. Hopefully we'll do IPO. But again, if you look at those guys, they don't actually come to events at all. So I assume you probably have a similar issue sometime, because if especially companies going for a large, IPO type, they really keep their head down. They don't mess about. So you need, I think, as a society, you need some flagship companies. So we hope that Laharus would be one. The one that come to know is Millennium IT, which sold its business to London Stock Exchange. People should write about that more often, I think. I don't know what the deal they've done, whether they had to keep quiet, but that's a great result. So yeah, I think it's changing, but yeah, I think we ought to talk about, that's what I said, if you share knowledge, if you talk about what works and what doesn't work, people can learn, right? And we're not really competing with the guy next to us. We're competing with somebody else.
Thank you. Can we have some questions, please? Just a raise of hands and I'll give you the mic. This meetup is for you all, so it's for the entrepreneurs. And you all can clear any doubts, and there's no better panel to ask than this. So, well, moving on. Lovely. Let me come there.
So quick question, Lahiru. If I asked you right now, given where you are, if you could change 3 things for you to be more successful as a startup, what would be the 3 things?
So my market will essentially go up by 5 times. I would love to have a magnify effect of what we are doing right now. So to break it down, what I'm essentially wishing for is a bigger talent pool for development of software and anything tech. That will be number 3. Number 2. Number 3 will be, it will be great if we had a GDP per capita of, I don't know, $55,000. Done and done. Thank you.
Nope. So just moving on, I would also, strip it down to in a way saying facilitators of monetary and non-monetary. We could take the monetary as land and spiralation, the facilitators that we have, which greatly helps entrepreneurs and startups here. But if you take the non-monetary aspect, I would like to hear a bit from Lahiru, because I already had this conversation with you. So.
Inosh actually told me about this aspect earlier on, and the non-monetary aspect is essentially what we are experiencing right now as a unit. It's the help one gets from each other. I mean, even from meetings today, we met with Manoj, yourself, and Asif? Fatih. And I think he is somewhere here. So essentially, I mean, helped us so much. I mean, he was essentially talking about targeted marketing and so on and so forth. So one of the things which we have to do, this is a bit of a gear change on, and I think maybe Anush and Deshal will kind of chime on it from more of a policy standpoint, is this idea that, wealth creation happens at this stage by helping each other. Again, 20, 30 years back, my dad was in the shoe industry, my uncle was in the shoe industry, and every 5 years we wouldn't talk for a year. So I mean, that is how the cookie crumbles, because I mean, you have a shop in Nugegoda and he has a shop in Nugegoda, and things don't work out quite right. So, but I think this dynamic is a bit more different. You collaborate, you come up with a better, better product. I mean, talk about the shoe industry. I mean, Sri Lanka used to dominate, at least in the region. We had a foothold, but now all what we are doing is essentially importing it from either India or China and selling it here. So I think that happened because the companies were small. I mean, they turned up a rev, but since they never collaborated, they could never grow. I mean, but in regards to the garments, it's a different story altogether because they do far more collaboration. So essentially, that's it. I mean, the moment we open our eyes to it, maybe we'll be better at it. And Jeevan, if
in terms of collaboration, I think I think Slascom, for example, is, and you were saying, for example, the textile industry, actually when they created Slascom, they very much based it on JAF, which I think is a good thing, because a lot of things in Slascom work. A lot of companies, even though there are many competing interests in Slascom, they all get together and they work on very much the same initiatives. Whether it's going out on outward missions, inward missions in Sri Lanka as well. For example, future carriers, outward missions to Australia. As we go as a group, we all present and represent Sri Lanka. So there's always a common kind of bond when these companies go out, and I think Slascom has done that successfully, and I think that's why the industry right now is about 500 million to 600 million, and hopefully with a lot of tech startups, again I refer to Ruindu about to take 1,000 startups forward. We want to grow the industry to 1 billion by 2015, and by 2022 we want to be the largest export industry in Sri Lanka. So very kind of big goals, but I think the Slascom team is quite capable. Thank you.
So finally, we are talking about tech startups at the end of the day. If you take the technologies part of it, is Sri Lanka ready? I mean, let's say compared to Manchester, when you take the technology aspect, is the tech startups going to be viable enough? Because is Sri Lanka ready for it? So, from Manoj?
I think if you compare, rather than Manchester, if you compare UK versus Sri Lanka is geographically 1/4 the size. And in terms of population, is 1/3. So there's more people living per square meter or square mile in Sri Lanka than in England, so in the UK. But then if you look at the mobile penetration, I remember when I was living here, getting a landline telephone was so hard. But now people carry more than one mobile, right? So there's a massive mobile penetration. And studies show that if you look at Africa, for example, because they are geographically dispersed, they use mobile for online payment. I don't know whether I don't know enough to say whether people here use mobile for payment, but I think the mobile is a really area that it touches everybody. So mobile, you got apps. A lot of people got smartphones and all Nokias and whatever else. So you can now start to deliver services through that mobile. People might not have time to sit in front of a computer or a laptop. Those devices might be expensive. I think I've seen tablets, they seem to be fairly cheap here. So these things are becoming accessible. That means, there's a device, and it's you to come up with some means of selling something to them. It doesn't have to be a TV. It doesn't have to be a device. It could be a service. So there's a great opportunity right now. The market is, the penetration is there. It's just you got to come up with the services. Again, if you look at Sri Lanka with 20 million odd people, there hasn't been many services delivered. So whoever rises to the occasion has a great advantage, just like you're doing. So I think I'm very optimistic about it, and so should you.
Thank you.
I just have a take on that, what the opportunities in the West and what the opportunities in kind of emerging countries is. And I think, don't think about it, if I was in the West, I would be able to do a lot more, etc. But what I like this, we're in a unique position to create something what I call Jugaad innovations. Basically, it's innovations by doing more with less. Okay, and I think that's a key concept, especially if you're in emerging countries, is to think about do more with less. If you look at, I think if you look at India, I think they started innovation of where they share the same cell tower, right? And I think that's moved here now too. So I think if you look at using the same assets to generate more, kind of innovations, I think emerging countries like us will have a unique perspective on, right? And I don't think we necessarily need to copy the West. We need to look at ourselves and see how can we make our own kind of mark in the world. And I think in Sri Lanka you're in a unique perspective, and I think that we need to look at that.
Thank you, gentlemen. So I think we have taken 35 minutes for our discussion, and any questions from the audience, please? Yes, we have one.
Ecosystem is lacking in Sri Lanka. Like it could be places where they can work, or it could be a government policy, it could be other driving factors. So up to your understanding, what kind of elements of the startup ecosystem lacking over here?
So having a unique perspective in the last 3-4 years, I think what's needed in the ecosystem is obviously a lot more kind of competitions, which I think is getting done. We have at least 5 to 6 competitions every year now. One with HSBC, with Venture Engine, etc., where we have business line competitions, and kind of going through this ecosystem, people are able to kind of see how their idea works, fine-tune their business model, get some advice from people on the panel, etc. So I think more competitions probably. I mean, I think there's a reasonable amount already happening. Maybe we can do better with more. The other thing the ecosystem's needed is probably, I think, more mentorship. And I think, people giving time rather than money. And that's very key in an ecosystem, is people having the time to mind share and say, okay, let me look at your business plan, let me see how I can help you with. We need a lot more mentors. Obviously, Lankan Income Network is there for mentorship, but they also put in, once they put in their money, they're going to give you that mentorship for free. So that's that's the idea behind that. But I think maybe more mentors, if we can find like a mentor network, exclusively mentor network does not necessarily take more a stake in the company. Could be a good idea. I also think more incubation centers are needed. We're doing our part. Doing 3,000 square feet of incubation center. We need a lot more incubation center. Maybe in Candy, Jaffna, etc. All these other places as well. And yeah, I think, and then in terms of ecosystem, we have a unique. Now seed level funding is taken care of. We need to look at Series A, Series B. Where do these initial seed investors exit to? And we need to look at bringing in the big venture capitalists, etc. In a big range. There are few, but they take very few risks. So we need to look at kind of the funding mechanism and how that works as well. In terms of, I think, changing the culture as well. We need to change the culture because these fear factors, and I think that we can do with education. We're trying to take the Venture Engine live on and telecast it so that people can actually see it and then understand what entrepreneurship is and what self-entrepreneurship is, and etc. So I think a bit of more education on kind of what entrepreneurship is. I think that's more or less what we need to do in the next 5 years to encourage and stuff.
Just to add to what you said, because we are a very small company. I mean, takas is a kind of company. So, but for us, what is most necessary to survive to the next level, if you take the money factor out, is essentially talent and people who essentially what your mentorship and helping us. So we, for instance, have Carlinga on board here. He's been carrying our tech side of takas for the last 7 months. We haven't paid him a dime, lots of copies, but that also I share with him sometimes. So essentially, and I want this to maybe go to the next panel discussion from a policy standpoint. I mean, government policy has to change in Sri Lanka where we start valuing ideas over money. I mean, money is fine. So for instance, in Sri Lanka, you can bring in money and get a work permit quite easily. But let's say you have a bright idea, and bright ideas make a lot of money in a short time, there's no chance of somebody coming and working here illegally. So I think from our side as well, I think we we are in the same page here, but we have to increase the idea of a Sri Lankan identity. Unfortunately, the idea of Sri Lankan identity currently is probably something which is very brown or light brown, better light brown than darker. But I mean, that has to expand, I think, because anybody who wants to live in Sri Lanka and who we feel this island is good enough to live, and there's a lot of them, we need to attract them. And I think that might fail in an ecosystem.
Thank you, Lahiro. So, do you have any questions? Okay, so since you don't have any questions, I would like to say thank you for all these three gentlemen. Thank you for your valuable insight. And I would like to call the second panel members, Rumindu from SLASCOM. And we have Desha, Director, Sampat Bank, Anushka Videsinghe, Economist, Institute of Policy Studies. Please have it.
Hi, I'm Fayaz Huda. I'm the program head for private sector development at ICTA. We basically try to help the IT industry grow in Sri Lanka. Some of the mentions about future careers, international business promotions, and so on. ICTA funds most of those activities. I also run a program called Spiralation, which stands for Spiral of Innovation. We've started that 4 years ago to exclusively support tech startups in the country. So far, we've supported about 20 plus startups. Some of them are here today, those successful companies. The program has managed to create companies within about 2 years who've grown their revenues in excess of 50 million rupees. The program also, the companies have created maybe about 250 new jobs in the market. I personally get involved in a lot of the startup related activities because I consider myself a different type of entrepreneur as well. Although in the past, before I joined ICTA, I've had the opportunity of starting a few companies, failing, representing a few international brands and so on in a personal capacity. So that's my background.
Cool, thanks Faiz. So quickly, I guess, my name is Rumindu. I've had the good fortune of being involved with a whole bunch of startup activity in the last probably 5 years total, but more intensely in the last 3 years. I must confess that I'm actually gaining far more than I'm giving back. It's been an amazing ride. And I think the thing that I'm most passionate about in life right now is really working towards this 1,000 Tech Startup program. And I think one thing that I feel that has given me the oomph is probably the fact that I'm a dual citizen. I was born in Canada. My parents thankfully were foresightful enough to bring me back to Sri Lanka when I was 5. I grew up here, went back, worked for a bit and came back. And I think that gives a very interesting perspective to really appreciate what we have here. And I know that from a tangible sense, from knowing that my peers that I've studied and worked with in Canada and what they have to do to just survive and to live versus the lifestyle that I'm able to live here, plus for a lot of the people that I look in the audience and I know how well they live their life. And to me, to actually help all of the others to follow, to see that potential is the biggest drive that I have. So I'm not going to go into details, but what I really urge is in the next, we have half an hour, I guess, is I'm really going to ask the audience and all you guys to actively engage. We have a great opportunity right now. I think in Sri Lanka, we have probably a 5-year window to make a difference. So every time that we have these kind of meetups, and I thank Manoj and everyone for organizing this, is we need to get to the heart of the matter very fast. There's some great initiatives happening. A lot of people have committed some hard time, a lot of money being put in. We need to hear from those who are really the champions of the industry, which are you guys, who are actively putting your skins in the game, to come back and say, 1, 2, 3, here's what I need, right? And I think then we, from guys like me who have missed my chance of being an entrepreneur, I'm kind of living my life vicariously through you guys. But what we do have is we have some connections and some networks that we can try and bring to bear to help create that. So my active urge in the next half an hour is that all you guys engage and be very specific about what you think needs to get done. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm Deshal Dimel. I know nothing about tech, and I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm actually very risk averse. My connection, I guess, is through Lahiru. I've been friends with him for a long time, and I remember bouncing off the idea of Takas, initially thinking that he's mad. But then seeing it grow and becoming extremely proud of him in terms of what he has done and in terms of what he has achieved, and also some insights into the whole industry in this year and a bit now. I'm an economist by training. After my studies, I came back to Sri Lanka and I worked initially at the Institute of Policy Studies, where I was engaged mainly in economic policy research. Subsequently, I was working with Haley's, so more in the corporate world and getting a little bit more exposure to, I guess, some of the realities of business and risk-taking and so on. And also in the last couple of years, I've been involved with Sampath Bank, so I get a little bit of idea in terms of the banking sector and in terms of the traditional financing industry, which is very different to what really you rely on, or what supports the growth of the startup and the tech industry in Sri Lanka. So I will hopefully be able to bring some insights into the way that finances work in Sri Lanka, what the thinking is, why it always doesn't always, why what could be done better in order to support the startup and the tech industry in Sri Lanka. So hopefully any questions can be directed in those kind of lines. Thanks.
Thanks, Desha. Thanks, Manoj. My name is Anushka Vijayasinghe. I am an economist at Institute of Policy Studies. Again, like Deshal, know nothing about the industry, but get very excited to hang out with people like you. And I think my first real intro into the potential that Sri Lanka has in this space was when I worked for a short time at the World Bank, and I went to the ICTA team actually to see some of the villages where tech was really penetrating at the most local level. And there was a young kid who was in a tiny village where there wasn't even enough space for our van to get through. The telecenter there was the only building in the entire village that had electricity, and these kids would make sure they come there every afternoon after school. The parents who started coming to wait for the children, for the class to finish, they also started entering the telecenter, and they also started getting interested in tech. Anyway, this kid was using keyboard shortcuts that I didn't even know existed. He was able to recreate the Sunlight logo in under 5 minutes on Photoshop, and this kid was about 11 years old. So that's when I knew I seriously know nothing about tech, but I also realized the huge potential that it holds. After that stint at the World Bank, I joined the economics division at the Government Peace Secretariat, which was subsequently wound down. But there, what we were really trying to do was push private enterprise into the north and east, particularly the east, through private-public partnerships, get business to start going into Jaffna, which is interesting, very exciting time. And then I joined Deshal also at IPS, where I'm going to try and cling on to the word entrepreneurship by saying I like to see myself as a policy entrepreneur. Policy entrepreneurship is what we do at IPS, where we use research to push the policy agenda, look for windows of opportunity when policymakers are listening, work with partners like ICTA on issues of competitiveness. We do the Global Competitiveness Report for World Economic Forum, work with SLASCOM, which we're working now with Mano on pushing how can we look at the policy framework needed to push the top export, IT to be the top export, and things like that. So in that sense, looking for policy windows to drive that agenda and be entrepreneurial in that sense. So I really like speaking to groups like this, because like Ravindu, I gain a lot more probably than I give, but I'm happy to share some thoughts on the policy context. So thanks.
Thank you very much for a quick introduction. So it looks like there's a lot more happening than I ever thought. If I understand, then obviously Ravindu is working on 1,000 startups. Fires has done some, what's the quantity, 20 or 50? I can't remember. 20. And I also understand from Microsoft in Sri Lanka that they have a program called BizSpark. So I assume you guys know about that program. They also have about 50 startups going through that. So in terms of numbers, there seemed to be a lot more activity than personally I knew, and perhaps that even you may have known. So is there has anybody, probably from your side, I know, Anushka, you haven't been involved with the startup side, but, Inosh and also Gihan write about startups. But what do you think that, in terms of research-wise, that could perhaps help elevate these startups in a little bit more mainstream? It's not quite mainstream, but what do you think might help?
So I think that the first steps even before startup is seeing technology in the same way that we see any of the other industries. Because for me, and many of us who have begun to look at this, we realize that the tech sector, IT and IT-enabled services have emerged and thrived without any heavy deal of government support or government intervention, unlike maybe garments that had quota systems, preferential trade agreements, or even other crop processing. So I think even on the research side, even realizing that this industry is a unique industry in itself to look at, even including recognizing it enough for it to be included in textbooks when you're talking about the Sri Lankan economy at school, forgetting that it's in the top 5 exports, where we still talk about the traditional ones. So I think before even we get to the research side, even realizing that how big this can potentially be, because even in some of the research work that we have been asked to do by government partners, the IT sector or IT-enabled services is seen almost separate. It's seen, okay, we want to look at the R&D required in fisheries, agriculture, industry, something else, and IT. What does that mean? Because for me, I see the IT sector, and from some of the examples we're seeing in garments, that IT-enabled services will transform all of the industries listed above kind of deal. So for me, the starting point really is recognizing that this is a game changer and it's no longer just another industry.
Just comparing UK versus here, if you look at the education system in UK, my kids are learning about Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint. They're not learning about coding in UK. So there's a big movement right now, which is really coming from the private sector rather than public sector, trying to get kids to learn coding and to understand the importance of that. But it is taking a long time to happen. It's not there yet. All the schools in UK obviously got computers, and so is here. I mean, I went to Royal College in here. I left Sri Lanka in '88, and at that time we had BBC machines. So the belief is that technology touch every day, and therefore, if you know how to be part of that, which is about writing software, etc., you have a lot more freedom when you get to a point where you find a job, or there's a lot of knowledge. Is there any movement such as that in here, or schools? What can the schools do in terms of helping this process?
So I think in Sri Lanka we have about, including schools that have students, about 50 students to say 10,000 students. We have about 9,000 plus schools in Sri Lanka. And right now, if you look at technology or computers being available, 95% of the school-going population have access to a computer in the school, right? So that's kind of what technology is. In terms of content, I think there's a lot of, there's something called the SchoolsNet, which connects the schools, and there's a lot of content that the Ministry of Education has put on the various subjects that are taught in schools. Some are interactive, some are not so interactive for different levels. There's also a similar thing that's available for the universities called the distance education, from the Distance Education Modernization Project. called Nodes, which also connects all the universities and also has given the universities capability of producing their own content, and also has partnered with various organizations like the chartered accountants and professional bodies and so on to put content online for certifications and so on. And also there are lots of competitions that go on in terms of IT, software development, plus content generation for different subjects within the school system, right? What you mentioned about students learning, say, Word or PowerPoint or so on, yes, that is happening. And there's also software development type of activities that is happening, which I would probably think a little too much in some instances, which is kind of sometimes unnecessary to teach everybody to be software developers. It's not, it's not like everybody in the future is going to sit and develop code. So some of these challenges are there. We are discussing about how, some of these things could be kind of reflect real life requirements, right? So that's some of the things that's happening.
Just to add to that, I think if you look at Sri Lanka's education system, it's not very responsive to the market. It's largely, there's a lack of competition and it's largely public driven. I think if we can encourage more private participation in all aspects of the education space, you'll see much more responsiveness to what the market demands. If the market demands skills in coding, then over time the education system will also respond by delivering the kind of teaching that generates that. Of course, it's a very political issue in many senses, but I think there are ways in which you can include more market participation with the right type of regulation, and accordingly, I think you'll be able to see much more responsiveness to market demands in terms of what is required from the tech side as well.
Just a quick add-on to that also. I think in the earlier panel they talked, one of the speakers said, was talking about these kids who have gone abroad versus kids who are here. In some of the people who I've recruited, and it's certainly not for the same skill set that a startup would require, but what I see in the kids who have just come, I have kids who have just come out of school, and in those schools, because of the nature of those schools, and not international schools, local schools, because of the different types of activities, or almost the entrepreneurial skills that are being inculcated in the school, taking leadership at a young age, all of that. Some of my researchers who've joined, not even gone to university yet, just out of school, have been better than those who have come out of college or come out of even foreign universities. And it really goes back to the heart of what we're talking about, schools. The schools being really the anchor. I mean, it might take years for us to have IIT type universities. But if we can get the schools right, and this one statistic that I like giving out is that out of all the schools that we have, only 1/10 of all schools have the ability to teach A-level science stream because of a lack of labs. So naturally, we have fewer people going into doing science and engineering in university. But now that is being addressed with the whole program of 1,000 schools to get new labs. But even still, more than the hardware, the software that is being, and by software I mean the skills that are being taught for young kids to just take on leadership at a young age, be allowed to explore themselves a little more. Because just a simple example, you go, my office is right opposite Independence Avenue, and you see the kids coming for being taken on a class trip. They're not even allowed to step out of line to explore what is this tree. This school's brought from out of Colombo. What is this tree, or what is this little building or little structure that's just next to the line that they're being taken in, and the teacher just whacks them. So for me, that's a reflection of the education system that, it's rigid. You follow it, whether it's a class trip or whether it's in school or whether it's your extracurricular activities, it's very rigid. So building that entrepreneurialism at a school age really for me will be the game changer.
Right. Can I ask a question from you? Looking at, obviously we talk a lot about equity finance, which is, we talk about seed funding, angel rounds, etc. But I think there's a role that the banking and the existing finance systems can play. So if I sort of draw some of my own experience, in UK that there's been recognition that the government ought to do something, and I don't know whether it was felt here, but around 2008, we got really hit by the subprime mortgage issues and all that, and banks went down. So banks really stopped lending, especially to early businesses. I wouldn't even say tech businesses. And that's been a constant battle. But what the UK government did well before that, and even now, is that they created special instruments called, at that time it was called Small Firms Loan Guarantee Scheme, where, for example, that particular scheme, if the government gave a guarantee for 75% of the loan, but the bank still had to take a risk view on the 25%. So that got the bank to do the typical due diligence, but the government guarantee gave that big guarantee. So that was seen as a good move, but the banks still wouldn't lend because, by definition, they are very risk averse. So that's one of the things. I'll get to the next point as well, which is about creating tax incentives where high net worth individuals, it's actually beneficial for them to invest into startups than not. So they could rise off quite a lot of tax by investing into startup. So I'm just wondering whether, first of all, from the banking side, is there any movement? I mean, if for example, if you didn't know Lahiru and he came to pitch to you and said, I want I don't know, 1 million rupees loan, or whatever that amount is, how do you view? And is your views changing because there's more awareness?
Well, Lahiru asks me for $1 million every morning, but much like the cat. No, I think if you look back about 25 years, there was the emergence of venture culture in Sri Lanka. There was, again, in the early 1990s, there was tax incentives given to venture capital. But what really happened there was that was driven entirely by bankers. I think the initial was, Venture Lanka and a couple of others, basically through joint ventures between HNB, DFCC, and a couple of other banks. But the problem was they ran it exactly like they would run normal banks, right? Which is not how you can do this. You can't run a tech startup in that same way, or any kind of startup in that same way. And typically that was not very successful. You can see their lending profile is very limited, very narrowly skewed into a couple of industries, I think renewable energy and a few other areas. And it really hasn't been successful because there wasn't any different thinking. I think what you need to look at is where, for venture capital to be successful, you need to have from both the financing side as well as the borrowing side, there needs to be a meeting of minds. They need to speak the same language. They need to, the lenders need to understand the industry that they're actually lending to. And really that wasn't the case in Sri Lanka's early experimentation with venture capital. I think that story is changing now with the newer generation of venture capital that we're seeing in recent years. But I think that really is the crux, where the lender will take an active role in the business. They will possibly sit on the board, get involved in equity as well as debt financing and so on. And I think that is what's needed to make it more successful. What you talked about in terms of say tax incentives, I think one area there where we haven't really seen much engagement other than maybe in the IT sector is for industrial bodies themselves to pool together funds in order to support startups in their own field. So whether it's in the rubber industry or agriculture or cinnamon or something like that, because the industrial bodies themselves, they understand those businesses, and that is one area where the government could introduce, say, for instance, double deductible taxes or something like that on contributions to a fund that supports startups within that particular industry. And I think that helps create an ecosystem that is beneficial both to the startup that receives funds and also to the institution that is lending. Because, for instance, you can build a business that is further down the value chain that is beneficial to you. So I think that kind of ecosystem has been lacking, and I think that is something that through using tax incentives you can actually direct, or you can encourage or incentivize the creation of, I think, very effective, mutually conducive networks and ecosystems.
Just to add to that, what he mentioned was absolutely correct. One of the few successes of that, what happened at that time, Lanka Ventures and so on, is MIT, right? probably one success out of a whole heap of things that people did. Many failures, but I'm sure a lot of people learn from that. And the other areas, like you said, there is no taxation relief as such for funding startups, but there is, I think, a triple taxation relief, triple taxation deduction relief for research that is available. But that has to be through a university or some institution which is dedicated for research.
I'll ask one last question and then open to the panel. I'm conscious about the time, there's food waiting as well. So we heard a lot of support coming from the private sector, the entrepreneurs themselves, some of the high net worth individuals. So as a panel, do you think that the Sri Lankan government ought to have a role in this? Or should the government be left, kept well away from this and let the private sector take build the ecosystem and take it forward? If you can quickly give your views, all four of you.
I'll give my honest views, right? I think right now the issue is more with us. The government doesn't need to get involved. There could be a bunch of places, but from my experience that I've had, talking with quite a few of you in this room, to other entrepreneurs, we run a program with MIT called the MIT Global Startup Labs. It's been running with Motor Tour for the last 3 years. Starting this year, we opened it up across Sri Lanka. Quick stats, we had 350 people apply, 75 were selected, went through a 3-week incubation program to help them zone in on an idea that was high growth, as well as quantify a team that they could work with as a founding team. Brought that down to 40, that made sense. 15 teams came to 10. Now we're going through this phase of trying to kind of help them work through the prototype, pivot, produce. Through all of these guys, to answer your question, I think we need to help ourselves right now. Before we go and ask the government for anything else, I really don't think we're doing what we can be doing amongst ourselves. Just simple things like knowing what you want. I think every one of us need to be able to look in the mirror and ask very succinctly or very directly and be able to answer succinctly that the same question that I asked earlier. Given a magic wand, and it can't be 50 things. For where you are, prioritize 1, 2, 3 in that order. And I can tell you, I've asked this question from multiple people. Very, very few people have that clarity. And without that clarity happening at the micro level at each individual entrepreneur, it's very hard for, whether it be SLASCOM to other policies to even, forget about even going to the government, to have a clear point of view of what to impact on. So, long-winded answer is, I think there's a lot more that we can do amongst ourselves, and we need to quickly do that. Before it gets to the point, we will definitely get to a point where we need to kind of engage the government, but I think, in my mind, at least we have 2-3 years of real hard work, internally get our act together before we go do that.
I'm a firm believer that the government's role is primarily in setting the rules of the game and creating the right environment for the private sector to then run with their own business ideas. I think in that sense there are a few areas where there's still things to be done from the government end as well. For example, things like PayPal. I'm told that that's a very important thing for the overall tech industry in Sri Lanka, and I think that is what I'm told is that there's moves towards bringing that into Sri Lanka, and it's hopefully just a matter of time as opposed to a matter of if. So that I think that kind of thing needs to be expedited as quickly as possible. And also, if you look at internationally, there are several alternative sources of funding other than just going to your venture capitalists and so on. There's also things like crowdfunding and so on, which have been successful in other countries. But again, for that kind of thing, the rules of the game need to be set down very clearly, because it's basically looking at like any kind of public funding where you're putting investors at risk if you don't have clear legal structures and so on. So I think it's important that the government can look and see what the experiences of other countries have been in this kind of funding, and to then set the right ecosystem and the right kind of legislative framework to make this kind of thing feasible. Because if it does work properly, it can be certainly a very effective way of startups getting significant amounts of money from several investors, and without a huge amount of time and investment in actually the whole funding process. So I think that kind of thing can be done, and the government has a role in terms of creating that right ecosystem and environment to support that. Thanks.
I think I'm on board with all the other panelists, and I would say there are things that the government can still do, and there are a great many things that the government should get out of. I'll give you a couple of examples. One, Desha said setting the rules. I think for me, it's also making those rules easier. Inherently, startups are small and medium enterprises up until they reach scalability and go in for an IPO. So for those small enterprises, making tax regulations easier, compliance easier and less costly, starting up registrations, you don't fill 3-4 forms, which all require by and large the same information. All of those things will matter. And I think it's an overall culture of a government being more open to private enterprise that is not based on some favor. So that another area that the government can do more on is helping us attract more talent. And it's not by any means to flood Sri Lanka with non-Sri Lankans, but similar to what NASSCOM did with the government, having mutually beneficial structures for non-residents to come in, share their knowledge, bring their networks, bring in the capital. One example of where I think about government getting out or rethinking, just a quick example, is the issue of foreign ownership of land. Now, you may think that this only affects residential property or tourism, or it's only for big FDI. But if new rules do go ahead where, okay, foreigners can't, lease is allowed, you'll also have to pay 15% tax. But okay, let's assume it's local. So if, for instance, Jeevan wants to expand, or someone like Jeevan wants to set up something like this and own land, there could be a time when, if the rules go ahead, the structure of your company could not have changed for the past 10 years and cannot change for the next 10 years. Otherwise, you're classified as foreign. So let's say you're going for an IPO where you will give up 51% of your company to a foreigner. What happens then? You want to attract VC and the VC fund is from abroad. What happens then? Or if it is a foreign investor partly owning, you're going to have 15% upfront tax for the entire lease period paid upfront. For a startup, that is nuts. So something areas in which the government can do more, and in others where it really should consider getting out of the way. So just some thoughts.
Unfortunately, I have the, let's say, disadvantage of being a guy who's in this panel, who is from a government agency. But what I would say privately versus what I can say here is different. So I think there's a lot that the government can do. That's much I can say.
Right. Is anybody wants to ask a question? Feel free. Anyone? There you go, Jeevan.
Yeah, I think some of the policy changes that you guys mentioned, having, if you fund startups, having some kind of tax deductible thing, that makes sense. How do we go about getting that, actually getting the government to say yes to that, or this 15% stamp duty on foreign-owned companies, with foreign-owned leases? That's another one that's just, it doesn't make sense, because you're trying to encourage IT BPO, and then you say, okay, but if it's a foreign-owned company, you can't, you have to pay 15% stamp duty. So all those things don't make sense to me. How do we go about changing that? What do we need to do?
If you look at a lot of the laws and the policies that are there, we either have a legacy, an issue that has been coming through for a number of years, probably decades, or there is something that happened just recently and they changed something. So for example, people coming and working in Sri Lanka from overseas, right? Big issue, we can't get people to come in, but anybody knows why we don't have inward migration, permanent residency kind of program, right? So maybe I shouldn't say, right? The things like, let's say, for example, the new Companies Act that we have now, right? You guys checked as directors what is your extent of liability, right? So we are trying to tell people to take risks, right? Spend all your money, max your credit cards, like what Chandika did with Creately, and do that, and obviously you're dealing with other people, you do stuff and take a risk, and you be great. And there are a lot of people talking about we have to create entrepreneurs, we have to create people who will create jobs and so on. But the environment around that is there to actually motivate them, a lot that needs to be done. So I think there are some things that is being done, but some of those things are probably easier to fix than some other things, because it's also related to other stuff. One thing I could say is, as a industry body, as a group, you can lobby for certain exclusions, right? So you have something that is blanket, but then you say this is excluded. So for example, when I was also part of the Human Resource Cabinet Subcommittee, and we managed to get the pay tax for the people who are in the IT BPO industry earning in foreign currency to be a max of 24% at that time, right? When everybody else paid 32%, right? So now, then, couple of years later, they brought everybody down to 24%, and we were there for a year, and then now it's down to 16%. The IT BPO industry can pay 16% on it. That's not available for anybody else apart from the pilots of the Sri Lankan Airlines, right? So you can work on something like that, where this industry is recognized differently. Even if you go into labor, right? So the Shop and Office Act doesn't allow females to work beyond a certain time in the night. The IT BPO industry is treated differently, right? So these are some of those things that you can work on as an industry body, lobby for exclusions, right? So.
Can I? You have another question? I was just going to try and engage with the audience and
For an entrepreneur, you can think of it the same way of trying to pitch to a startup. This is something that we have learned, where the same way you want to understand who your venture capital potential investor is and his interests, understand the interests of different policymakers and what they want. Secondly is, look what JAF has done. Almost everything that they have put forward comes through in a budget. So look at their secret and try and understand. And just like with VC, where you have to tell a good story, the IT body or all you have to tell a good story about this proposed tax incentive model or whatever it is. So that would be the part.
So the good news is that we're working with you to tell the story, right? So this time next year, Anushka is going to make sure that we actually tell a really good story and the government solves all our problems. Can I ask a quick question, which is coming back to my, let's solve today, right? I think there's a whole bunch of stuff, we can get lost in this curry of, oh my God, the whole world's crumbling, nothing's working. But I want to kind of engage with this team, right? How many of you again are entrepreneurs? How many of you have a startup today? Raise your hands. Alright, good. So there's a good family, right? I'm going to list out 5 things that seem to have come out as areas needing focus or kind of in the way or support needed for you to do better, right? One is access to talent. I heard that coming up. There was mentoring being brought up, active, formalized mechanism of having access to mentoring, access to finance, opening up markets to be able to actually go sell your produce or services outside of the immediate Sri Lankan market, or whether it be even in Sri Lanka, some IT penetration, whatever. Am I missing anything out of this 4? And government policy, right? So if you put those as a 5, I'm just trying to kind of quickly get in this room a prioritization, right? If you go back and say, if I go one by one and I want to raise your hand if you think that is your biggest body right now, right? So to put it in context, say doing ₹1 million a month right now, to take that to 10 million rupees a month. What is the one thing, the highest priority that's in the way for you to grow by 10x? Question clear? How many of you feel that government policy is the #1 issue for you to grow your company 10x? 3. 4. No, I'm saying right now today where you are, right? And I think for a lot of people, the issue is that they're not at the level where PayPal makes a difference. You're right, it might help, but I think... So, okay, let's rephrase it. PayPal, you want to put PayPal as government? Okay. Let's put the 5th one as PayPal and 6th one as other government policy. How many of you find PayPal your biggest issue to grow your company by 10x? Something, you, 2, 3. Other government policies, whether it be the inability to start a company, having to file taxes, the 15% land tax doesn't affect it. Okay, Jeevan. But Jeevan's fine then. I won't worry about Jeevan. Alright, cheers. Great. Access to mentoring. Strong mentors that can guide you, give you, be there before, can support you. Who find that as the top priority that they want to grow their company by 10x? 2, 3, 4. Okay. Access to funds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So far the winner. And what was the other one? Was exposure to markets. Being able to open up new markets for you to go sell your services outside of Sri Lanka. Alright. Good. So that seems like, so access to markets, access to funding. Sorry, talent. I missed talent. Talent? Really? Access to talent is the biggest issue. Access to talent, how many of you feel that today you don't have access to top talent or whatever the talent required to grow your company 10x?
At a particular price.
At a particular price. Are you serious? Oh my god, I'm actually getting education. Alright, so that seems to be, the top 3 seems to be access to talent, opening up new markets, and access to finance. Agree? That helps. Thanks.
But how do you do the talent? Because it's 750. Because some people come into the partners.
Let's go to the bar.
Right. No, we got food here as well. Okay, have you got any questions from the audience?
I don't have a question, but
You don't have a question?
no. I just wanted to say, you all spoke about the government role in furthering entrepreneurship. Everyone says the government can do a lot when they talk about this foreigners paying tax. Yes, it's bad. But the thing is, 25% owned foreign companies can still purchase because it's not classified as foreign owned and they don't have to pay these taxes. Correct? Sorry? No freehold, but if you had a company and it's only 25% owned by the foreigners, then that tax doesn't apply. Sorry? Not about the new rules. Okay, put that aside. What about the research and development?
Quite summed it up quite well. And I know quite a few of the entrepreneurs here, and I think none of us here are letting any of this stop us. We're still going ahead. But it's good to be realistic.
Just a quick question. 2 of my friends have come from abroad and they are willing to start a new company here. And they've recently run into a huge number of roadblocks. The biggest of them being the fact that they need to have a Sri Lankan director or a partner to sign off on everything. So is there any chance that these kind of roadblocks will be rolled off in the future, or will they have to keep on,
So you're saying a foreigner is trying to start up a company here?
Yeah.
I don't know. My point of view is let's just first help the Sri Lankan startups before we try to worry about foreigners trying to come and start up. But I don't know the answer, sorry.
So, yeah, but there are options for them to start a company fully by the foreigners, fully foreign owned. So you need to visit the board of investments for that. So you can't start that under the normal, whatever that you and I would start. But also I think what you mentioned, right? I mean, Sri Lanka, we need to look at, things relative context, right? We like to always complain. Of course, Sri Lanka has some issues, we need to, not some, we have lots of issues. It's not very different from other countries. Now you take starting, if you want to start a business in Thailand, do you know how many local directors you will need for every foreigner? Right. So Thailand is much more advanced than us, right? They have the big economy, higher GDP, all that. You've got situations like that, right? But again, but also we should not be complacent. So for example, in, I forget the country, the African, I think it's Rwanda, who were there in the Commonwealth Business Forum recently. I was part of that. And I was listening to a presentation where they said you can start up a company there in one day. They have visa on arrival, you can apply for visa online, all that stuff that we are talking about now. But then generally we regard Africa as being backward, right? But they say one day to register your business. To start operations, I don't know how long it will take, but register your business is one day. So I mean, there are things that we can also, you know, strive towards. We can look backwards and forwards and, you know, front and back, you know, whatever, up and down, but definitely must keep improving. But I do agree that things are not relatively to some places. I'm sure we can find places that are better, some places that are worse, but I think we need to soldier on.
I forgot to thank one person who's not here today. The food which is coming in is thanks to Microsoft. Essentially, they're picking up the tab there. So thank you very much for Microsoft. And thank you so much for each one of you. I mean, this went on for quite some time, and I was imagining a bit of a, people leaving one by one ever so slowly. But the fact that everybody remained here shows that this is very close to everybody's heart. And I want to thank each and everybody who participated because everybody has some time which they have dedicated just for this. I hope we get to know each other more personally, the ones we don't know, so we can make this grow a little bit. And I encourage everybody to, through social media or any other means necessary, to spread the word and share your thoughts and so on and so forth. I'll give it to Manoj to finish up.
Right. Thank you very much. This, as I said at the beginning, this just started as saying, I'm coming over, can we have just a get together? And you've been waiting so patiently. We overshoot, I think, by nearly an hour. So I think there's food waiting downstairs, isn't it?
And one more note, I'm so sorry. Colombo Hackathon will happen on May 9th, right at Orion City. So I'll be there as well, and we can get to know it through Facebook. Speak to Chandika or Jeevan on it. Thanks so much. Thanks again. Good night.
And Takas is offering 50% discount on what is it?
Just lost my word.
So, what did you tell about the after party?
Oh yes, there is an after party, and if you were not contemplating going for it, it is 50% off till 11 o'clock, I think. So at Bayleaf. So if you want true value, bang for the buck, as they say, it's probably the place to. Thanks again.